Hey guys, tonight we step into the cool pre-dawn hush of ancient Rome, where marble glows blue under the earliest light, and a man stands still, half dressed, half dreading what comes next. You watch from the side as he lifts a robe from its folded perch, shakes it gently, and runs his fingers over a narrow band of purple stitched along the edge. It's just a stripe, a tiny thread of color that glimmers faintly in the soft light. And it could get him killed. This isn't an overreaction. This is Rome, where fabric meant power, color meant danger, and one misstep in your wardrobe could be interpreted as treason. You probably wouldn't survive your first laundry day here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, post your location and the local time. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. He breathes out slowly, slides the robe over his shoulder, adjusts the fold with practiced hands. It's a formal toga, bright white, stiff with careful pleats, and perfectly clean. Except for that one thing, the clavis lattice, the wide purple band that slices across the fabric like a bruise. He's a senator, and this is his uniform. The purple stripe is not optional. It marks his rank, his authority, his risk. Without it, he's a nobody in a very large, very pointy crowd. With it, he's powerful, but also visible, traceable, targetable, all because of a pigment that comes from the insides of sea snails, boiled into oblivion in vats that stink worse than a gladiator's socks after a long shift. Historians still debate whether the fear surrounding purple was entirely legal, symbolic, or more of a social minefield. What's clear is this: the line between wearing purple and being purple as an imperial was razor thin. He steps into the atrium, sandals clicking on mosaic stone. His servant, silent and always a step behind, has already packed his scrolls, arranged his stylus, and double-checked the toga's drape. You notice the way the fabric moves. It's heavy, not just in weight, but in implication. The street is waking up. You walk beside him now, past bakeries already smoldering, past statues still dark with shadow, toward the Senate. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. His clothes do the talking. There was a time, not long ago, when purple wasn't regulated, when it was just another dye, rare but not forbidden. But Rome, being Rome, couldn't resist turning thread into threat. You pass other men now, merchants in dull linen, craftsmen in rough wool, children barefoot and sticky with fig jam. None of them were purple. None of them could. In the crowd, someone bows slightly. The senator's face doesn't change. He just walks, eyes ahead, toga rustling like parchment. You notice another man approaching from the other side of the street. His robe also bears a purple stripe, but narrower. A knight, an ikes, slightly lower in rank. Still privileged, still marked. They nod as they pass. Brief, calculated. Purple, in this city, is both a beacon and a warning. If you're wearing it, you're someone. If you're not, and you try to, well, best case scenario, you're fined. Worst case, you disappear before your laundry even dries. As you near the Senate steps, the air thickens. Not literally, but it feels heavier, like everyone's waiting for something to happen. The guards at the entrance glance at the senator's stripe, their eyes flicking over it like measuring tape. He enters the chamber. Inside, marble columns rise like frozen waves. Benches line the room in gentle curves. Voices echo. Men shift in their seats. Togas swirl. You settle beside your senator, watching as he takes his place. His purple stripe settles across his chest, proud and precise. And yet, you see the way he glances sideways at another man with a slightly richer shade of purple. A bit wider. A bit more imperial. That one doesn't smile. He doesn't have to. Purple, here, is a competition. Not just of wealth or law, but interpretation. Who deserves it? Who owns it? Who wears it just a little too boldly? The room hushes. A message is unrolled. Debate begins. But half the chamber is watching robes, not rhetoric. Outside, the wind picks up. A breeze lifts the edge of your senator's toga, flicking the purple edge for just a second. And in that flicker, you understand the whole system, a city built on image, power stitched in color, and the ever-present fear that one thread out of place could unravel everything. You step away from the Senate chamber now, back down the stone steps, and into the thick morning hum of Rome. The sun's fully risen, washing the city in that flat, chalky light that makes even the marble statues squint. You follow the winding alleys down toward the docks, because if purple terrifies senators, you figure it's time to meet the thing that started all the trouble. Snails. Tiny, grumpy, mucus, heavy sea snails. Specifically, murex snails, found clinging to Mediterranean rocks, hoarded in baskets, and hauled inland by the sackful to meet their smelly, glorious fate. You wrinkle your nose before you even get close. The stench announces itself early, sharp, briny, and vaguely like rotting anchovies marinated in regret. You pass a cluster of workers, barefoot, bent double under the weight of wriggling baskets. They dump the contents into giant stone basins where the snails squirm briefly before going very, very still. The extraction process isn't pretty. One by one, snails are cracked open, and a small gland near the head, about the size of a lentil, is removed. It's this gland, full of a yellowish goo, that holds the magic. When exposed to sunlight and air, the goo undergoes a chemical change, turning from pale cream to green, to blue, and finally, deep, majestic purple. The whole operation takes days. And it takes thousands of snails just to dye one toga stripe. You begin to understand why this color costs more than gold. Why entire cities along the Phoenician coast built their wealth on mollusks. And why the sidewalks here are stained purple, too. Historians still argue whether the dye was first discovered by accident. Some say a dog bit a snail and came home with purple drool. Others claim it was divine inspiration from Tyrian gods. More likely, someone just got bored, boiled something weird, and said, "Huh, that's pretty." You stand near a dye basin and watch the sun catch the surface. The smell is objectively terrible, but the color, it really is beautiful. Dark and rich, like crushed blackberries at midnight. The kind of color that doesn't just say, "Look at me," but "Fear me a little," too. Workers stir the vats with long poles, keeping the mixture moving. Some wear cloths over their faces. Others don't seem to care anymore. One man turns to you and says, "This batch is for Alexandria. Special order. Must be strong enough to stain the hands for 3 days." You glance at his fingers. They're purple, not lavender, not lilac. Purple, like bruises on silk. You nod solemnly, like someone who definitely understands fashion chemistry. Elsewhere, snails are drying on racks. It's less glamorous than it sounds. A cat walks by, sniffs, and visibly reconsiders its life choices. You sympathize. You wander deeper into the dye district, stepping over stray shells and past amphorae sealed with wax. Each jar holds a sludgy concentrate, bound for Rome's elite. It'll be cut with water, mixed with oils, or painted on a fine wool. Sometimes, it's even used in cosmetics, though the scent doesn't scream romantic encounter. One stall displays finished cloth, bolts of fabric dyed in varied stages of purple, from stormy plum to nearly black. They shimmer in the light, an unmistakable status symbol even here, in this scented alleyway. You run your fingers across one. The texture is soft, but the dye stains your fingertips instantly. A vendor sees, shrugs, and says, "Hope you weren't wearing anything white." You weren't. Still, you imagine a senator doing this exact thing. Maybe centuries ago. Maybe yesterday. Fingertips stained before his big speech. A blotch of forbidden dye blooming across his sleeve like a warning. Back then, purple wasn't just rare. It was strategic. To wear it meant you'd spent money, time, or political favors. Maybe all three. It wasn't enough to wear a fine robe. You had to prove the purple in it came from snails, not some cheap vegetable dye. Experts could tell the difference by smell alone. Which says something about Roman perfume options. You sit near a storage crate, letting the wind blow the stink of dye past your face. Someone's boiling a new batch nearby, and the rising steam carries more than just heat. It carries empire, power, monopoly. Because purple, you realize, didn't stay a product. Rome made it a tool, a symbol, a weapon. And the snails, they just kept coming. You leave the dye district with your sandals sticking slightly to the stone, your fingers lightly purpled, and your sinuses humbled. The scent of snail remains clings to your tunic like a ghost that refuses to cross over. As you walk, the smell recedes only slightly, replaced by the more agreeable aroma of warm bread and sun, dried figs from a nearby vendor. Rome is full of extremes like this. Beauty and stench, glory and goo, often just a few steps apart. The dye itself, Tyrian purple, the most prestigious pigment in the Roman world, named after the Phoenician city of Tyre, where snails were sacrificed by the thousands to produce this shimmering color, shifting liquid royalty. And yet, for all its splendor, Tyrian purple was a nightmare to make. You're invited to a small workshop behind a merchant's stall, a little cleaner than the larger dye houses, but still unmistakably pungent. A young man stirs a vat while an older woman carefully inspects dried shells, breaking them with a practiced twist. They explain, in the kind of slow rhythm reserved for those who've done something too many times, how the color changes depending on the snail species, the time of year, even the weather. You nod along, only half listening, because the smell has hit that point, the one where your brain starts suggesting, maybe breathing through your ears is worth a try. The woman laughs when she sees your face. Smells like money, doesn't it? You're not convinced. Historians still debate the exact recipe, because the dye, making families kept it secret, passed down like a sacred incantation. The process wasn't shared outside of tightly bound guilds. Some say sea salt was added, Others argue for wine, or even stale urine as a binding agent. You decide not to ask whether they've tested that one recently. The extracted dye wasn't just rare. It was volatile, sensitive to light, time, and temperature. If left too long in the sun, it could fade to gray. If mixed too quickly, it might curdle. The dye makers were part chemist, part gambler. And then there's the smell. Let's dwell on that for a moment. Gently, from a safe mental distance. Entire coastal towns were known for their reek. The city of Tyre, once legendary for its trade and architecture, was also infamous for the stench that clung to it year-round. Strabo, the geographer, once joked that visitors could find the dye factories with their eyes closed and their noses wide open. Imagine living there. Sun, drenched cliffs, sapphire waters, and the permanent odor of decomposing snail guts. You could see why the dye merchants charged extra. You pause beside a drying rack. The cloth hanging there is exquisite, deep violet, with subtle blue undertones, almost metallic in the shifting light. It doesn't look dyed. It looks infused, like the fabric was born this way. No wonder people lost their minds over it. You hear a story from the workshop owner, a tale passed down, likely embroidered a little, about an early Roman general who paid for a purple, trimmed cloak and refused to wear it because he couldn't stomach the smell. He had it buried with his horses. She says, deadpan, a gift to the gods, or a punishment for the horses. The purple garments weren't worn every day, not just because of cost or risk, but because they were high maintenance. Rain could ruin them. Improper washing would strip the shine. And sweat, very Roman sweat, could turn the brilliant color into a blotchy mess. Fashion was agony long before heels and corsets came along. Even storage was complicated. Fine purple cloth had to be kept in sealed chests, away from light and air. It was often perfumed with myrrh, or wrapped in scented cloth, to overpower the base smell. You try not to imagine opening your closet and being punched in the face by perfume and fermented mollusk. You step back into the street, blinking in the late morning light. The dye district is behind you now, but a soft trace of purple still stains your fingers. You wonder, how did something this gross become that glorious? The answer, you're starting to see, isn't in the color itself. It's in the cost, the labor, the illusion. Tyrian purple was never just about beauty. It was about showing everyone else that you could afford to smell like a garbage fire and still be considered divine. You pass a child holding her mother's hand. She points to a man in a cloak with a small purple hem and whispers, "He's important." That's it, isn't it? Purple didn't need to be liked. It just needed to be recognized. Oh, you walk the edge of a public square now. A little cleaner, a little quieter, and still clutching the scent of dye like a reluctant souvenir. In the open space ahead, you spot a small group gathering under a marble colonnade. They're murmuring, not about politics or philosophy, but about a robe. It's folded neatly across a merchant's arms. You squint. Is that purple? Not a stripe. Not a trim. Not an edging. The entire thing glows with that unmistakable rich hue. Deep as wine. Dark as thunderclouds. And it's not subtle. No clever accent here. This is head, too. Toe imperial plum. A man nearby mutters, "Too much." You're inclined to agree. Because in Rome, wearing purple was a gamble. Wearing all purple, that was a challenge. A declaration. Possibly even a trap. Enter the laws. Roman emperors, ever fond of control, didn't just command armies. They commanded wardrobes. At some point, they realized that the more expensive and rare something was, the more power they held if they restricted it. So, they did. They restricted the ultimate purple. Only emperors could wear a toga picta, the fully purple toga embroidered with gold. Not just dyed, but practically gilded. It was worn for military triumphs, religious ceremonies, and the most grandiose public appearances. Seeing someone else in one, that wasn't fashion. That was treason. Historians still argue about when the monopoly on purple really crystallized. Some point to Julius Caesar's reign, others to the later emperors like Nero or Diocletian. What's clear is that by the time the imperial machine was in full swing, the dye didn't just mark privilege. It defined who ruled. You sit on a stone bench and imagine it. You're just a merchant, or a poet, or a senator on the edge of retirement. You pass a young man in a purple robe. Too purple. People notice. Some whisper. And suddenly, it's not just gossip. It's a question. Does he have permission? That's all it takes. One question leads to a second. One whisper reaches a guard. One look too long, and someone reports it. Next thing you know, the man is gone, and his robe hangs as an exhibit in a public trial. Or disappears entirely. Burned. Buried. Erased. There's a term for this kind of control, sumptuary law. Rome had many. Laws that dictated what citizens could wear, eat, own, or display, based on their class. Not because it made people look nicer, but because it made the hierarchy look firmer. Purple became a legal fence. If you were inside it, you were sacred. Outside, keep your color choices modest. You walk now toward a temple. Not a massive one, just a neighborhood shrine to Juno. Her statue peeking through the colonnade in white marble. You see a priestess arranging offerings. Her robes are crisp white, with a hint of purple at the sleeve edge. Just enough. Nothing more. That's another layer. Religion. The gods were color-coded. Jupiter, chief among them, was firmly associated with purple. Sacrifices made in his honor were often wrapped in purple cloth. Even animals sometimes wore dyed ribbons. Yes, even the goats. Especially the goats. And if the gods were purple, then by extension, their earthly representatives needed to show deference, but not pretend to be divine. You step back into the street. A palanquin passes, carried by 4 sweating men. Inside, a woman reclines under sheer fabric, her sandals just barely visible. Her nails, painted with a purple dye, not the same as the robe pigment. Cheaper. Plant-based. Still meaningful. Her husband's a magistrate. Someone murmurs nearby. You're starting to see the game. Every inch of purple on a person is a puzzle piece. A story. A signal. Whether they earned it. Whether they bought it. Whether they're hiding too much of it under their cloak to stay subtle. And somewhere, always, is someone watching. You hear a rumor, told in a hushed, dramatic tone, about a man who gifted his lover a purple scarf. Just a small one. She wore it to a banquet. An imperial cousin was there. The cousin left quietly, said nothing. And 2 days later, the man's estate was seized. All because of a scarf. You shake your head and keep walking. Purple, you realize, wasn't just rare. It was radioactive. Beautiful. Yes. Enviable. But ultimately, Dangerous. Like gold with teeth. And that merchant from earlier, the one holding the full, purple robe, he's already gone. Vanished while you were watching goats. Smart move. You're walking the shaded side of the forum now, trailing your fingers along cool stone columns, when a sudden burst of laughter stops you. Not polite chuckles. Full. On. Someone. Just. Got. Caught laughter. You turn and see a small group of soldiers pointing at a man who's backing away nervously. His robe. Clean. Modest. Except for one vivid, purple stripe trailing a little too far down the hem. You've seen this look before, panic and pride in equal measure. He's trying to pass it off like it's not what it is. Maybe he had it dyed overseas. Maybe he didn't know how strong the pigment was. Maybe, just maybe, he thought he could get away with it. He can't. Because in Rome, fashion crime was a real thing. And purple, that wasn't just a crime of taste. It was, at times, literally a matter of life and death. You shuffle closer, pretending to examine a nearby statue, while a guard approaches the man. Their exchange is low but firm. The words authentic dye and unauthorized trimming are used. The man tries to laugh it off, but his fingers keep twitching at his sleeve, like if he tugs it up far enough. Maybe no one will notice the edge glowing like a beacon of bad decisions. The guard confiscates the robe, leaves him in a tunic. The man scurries away, trying to preserve his dignity with a threadbare shawl. The crowd dissipates, already moving on to other gossip. You sit down on the fountain's edge, head spinning slightly. Imagine being so powerful, so obsessed with maintaining control, that you invent laws about colors, and then enforce them with jail time. Or worse. But Rome did just that. Sumptuary laws weren't guidelines. They were public policy. Violating them could lead to fines, property seizures, even exile. And depending on the emperor's mood, exile might mean a short trip to the countryside, or a permanent vacation to the afterlife. Historians still debate just how rigorously these laws were enforced. Some say they were mostly for show, a way to maintain cultural norms. Others insist that, especially under emperors like Nero or Domitian, the laws were tools of intimidation, a way to trap rivals or punish arrogance. The man with the long hem. He probably didn't mean anything. Maybe he bought the robe from a seller who whispered that no one would notice. Maybe he was just trying to impress a neighbor. But in a society where appearance was power, even a single thread out of place could suggest ambition, defiance, or delusion. You remember a tale told earlier about a senator's wife who wore a purple hair ribbon to a public theater. It was only seen briefly, fluttering in the breeze. A rival family reported her. Her husband lost his rank within a week. The ribbon, presumably, was burned. The hair, unknown. Fashion had always carried messages. But in Rome, clothing was a battlefield, and purple was the most dangerous armor. You rise and continue your walk. Down narrow alleys, past laundry lines where more practical folk dry tunics in the sun. You see dyes, red, yellow, faded brown, but not purple. Never purple. You pass a shop where a tailor is hemming a tunic. He glances up, gives a tight smile, then nudges a scrap of cloth under the table as you approach. It's plum, colored, probably vegetable dye. Definitely illegal if the wrong person saw it. This is the other half of the story, the underground textile economy. Tailors who specialize in almost purple fabrics, traders who smuggle in cheap dyes from distant markets, couriers who promise to wash out the intensity before delivery. You ask the tailor, casually, how often he gets requests for forbidden trim. He snorts. Weekly. And every one of them says, it's just a little. Who would notice? Then he adds, with a wink, the emperor always notices. He's only half joking. You lean against the wall and watch as a young woman enters the shop, glancing over her shoulder. She carries a length of cloth the color of eggplant skins. Deep, shadowy, but undeniably purple. The tailor doesn't flinch. He pulls out a swatch of gray and lays it over the purple with practiced ease. Nothing to see here. You step back into the sun. The laws didn't stop the desire. If anything, they made it stronger. People want what they can't have, especially when it shimmers, especially when it smells like victory, or defiance, or the chance to turn heads. Purple, in Rome, didn't just make you visible. It made you vulnerable. And yet, it kept showing up. You're wandering now along the edge of the Aventine Hill, where the breeze feels a little cooler, the noise a little thinner, and the city's pulse seems to soften beneath your sandals. This isn't where the emperors live, or the rowdy market crowds gather. This is where people observe, and they notice things, like a robe's trim or the shade of someone's belt. You pause near a shaded portico where two older men are seated on folding stools, sipping watered wine and pretending not to be staring at a passing youth. He's tall, lean, trying very hard to appear indifferent as he struts down the lane in a crisp tunic with, yes, an embroidered hem dyed a suspicious shade of purple. Not quite imperial, but close enough to start whispers. One of the older men leans toward his companion. His family only made Praetor, didn't they? The other grunts, trying to climb, one stitch at a time. They chuckle, and you realize just how razor-sharp Roman social scrutiny really was. A millimeter too much dye could be interpreted as delusion. A shade too bold. Overcompensation. It wasn't just about legality. It was about knowing your place. And purple, even in moderation, threatened to blur the lines. You follow the young man discreetly. He rounds a corner, vanishes into a small doorway with a painted lintel. A tailor's shop. Of course. Inside, bolts of cloth are laid out with careful precision. None are overtly purple, but there are hints. Blue edging that could be coaxed warmer. Maroon panels that, under certain light, might pass as faded Tyrian. It's all about plausible deniability. The tailor sees you watching, and he gives you that look, the one that says, you didn't see anything. Or if you did, it wasn't what it looked like. Because under the layers of law, there's an entire economy built around almost purple. A senator's wife might order a plum sash, just for private dinners. A merchant could request a cloak lined with coastal blue. Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge. A teenage son of a minor noble might commission sandals with eggplant, tone straps to show off at a festival. The tailor's job. Walk the tightrope. Historians still argue how widespread these underground trends were. Some believe the fear of punishment kept most Romans cautious. Others suggest that quiet rebellion through wardrobe was far more common than the records let on, because the people enforcing the rules were often bending them, too. And there it is, the senator who lectures about tradition in the forum but wears a purple, trimmed undergarment to dinner parties. The general who insists on strict decorum but buys his daughter violet, dyed shawls from Eastern traders. The magistrate who accidentally receives gifts of illegal fabric and keeps them because it would be rude not to. You step back into the sunlight and take a slow breath. Purple, in Rome, was less a color than a currency, a measure of how close you dared stand to the fire. And everyone had their own secret exchange rate. You pass a group of women seated on woven mats beneath a fig tree, embroidering garments. One of them holds up a tunic for inspection. The stitchwork is delicate, precise, gold thread weaving through a hemline that almost carries a violet sheen. They're laughing about someone who was caught at a wedding in full purple trim and tried to claim it was just very dirty white. Another woman fans herself. He's lucky the praetor had a sense of humor, she says, or a bad sense of smell. The joke lands. Everyone laughs. You pause. Smile. Keep moving. It's not always about ambition. Sometimes purple was a gift, a gesture, a temptation. You hear about a poet, clever, charming, famously broke, who wooed a senator's daughter by gifting her a handkerchief stained with wine and passed off as Tyrion died. She swooned. Her father didn't. The poet disappeared. Another tale, a slave who found a scrap of purple cloth and wore it beneath his tunic for months, hoping it would bring him luck. When it was discovered, he was flogged, but the mistress of the house gave him a silver coin for his imagination. You turn down a quieter street now, where the walls are higher, the windows fewer. A villa stands behind a gate carved with laurel leaves and dolphins. You hear a faint sound. Music. No. Weaving. Inside, slaves work looms in rhythm, fabric stretching from beam to beam. You glimpse it for only a second, but it catches your breath. A full robe, rich violet, with embroidered edges that gleam faintly gold. Not for sale. Not for anyone outside that gate. This is the legal purple. The real stuff. Authorized. Reserved. Destined for someone whose name you probably know, or will hear tomorrow, in whispers. You wonder what they'll do in it. Stand on a balcony. Deliver a speech. Accept tribute. Or perhaps, just sit in a garden, sipping spiced wine, knowing the robe on their shoulders could start a war, or end one. You leave the alley, your pace slower, your thoughts thicker. Because in a city that breathes rank and protocol, sometimes all it takes to tip the balance is a thread. Not a sword. Not a scroll. Just thread. And everyone's watching. You're back on the streets again. Cobblestones warmed by the day. Torchlight flickering in brass sconces as evening settles over Rome like a soft velvet shawl. The hum of the city has dimmed into a background murmur, but you still catch it. The rustle of togas, the creak of carts, the distant clatter of amphorae being moved and counted. And everywhere, still, that faint shimmer of purple. Now that you've seen it, really seen it, you can't unsee it. The color lingers like a secret handshake between Rome's elite. A flick of color meant to separate, to warn, to whisper, I'm not like you. You pass a portico where 3 men sit in quiet conversation. One wears a senator's toga, the toga praetexta, its broad purple stripe a legal requirement, not an indulgence. But the other two. One wears a thinner band, an equestrian perhaps, and the other, nothing at all, plain white. And yet, it's the plain one who speaks the most. The others listen. That's when it clicks. Purple isn't just about appearance. It's a reminder, a way to keep everyone sorted, to speak without words, to nod across a crowd and know instantly where the other person fits. or doesn't. You keep walking. Toward the curia again. The Senate chamber glows dimly in the distance. You slip inside with a small group of aides and scribes, trailing in behind the day's final discussion. There's no shouting now. No posturing. Just a few senators sitting in half. Light. Their words slow. Their togas slung more loosely than before. The purple stripes here no longer glow. They slump. They've carried a full day's weight. And now they rest. But they still matter. Because even in this quiet moment, the order remains. The widths of the stripes. The tones of the fabric. The subtle stiffening when a man with a slightly darker stripe stands to speak. Historians still argue just how much color dictated Rome's social structure, whether it was symbolic or systemic, whether it ruled people's choices or merely dressed them. But here, in the echo of old marble and tired voices, it feels unquestionable. Purple doesn't shout. It just is. A barrier. A mirror. A brand. You lean against a column and watch as two senators quietly debate grain prices. One of them adjusts his toga repeatedly, pulling it over his shoulder, smoothing the stripe with a kind of nervous habit. Not because it's loose, because it's too close to another man's. Too wide. Maybe. Too bright. The other man notices. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't have to. The silence says it all. And it's not just the fabric. It's how it drapes. How it's maintained. Whether it's fresh from a respected tailor, or slightly frayed from overuse. Whether your purple smells faintly of Phoenician snails, or of overcompensation. You hear a murmur. A story drifting down the benches. About a junior senator who dared to commission a tunic with 2 purple bands instead of 1. For symmetry, he'd claimed. He was later seen in court, wearing a plain tunic. Rumor says his property was quietly confiscated. Another says he was reassigned to a province where no one cares what color you wear because everyone's too busy surviving. You pass through the curia and out into a side courtyard where statues of past emperors loom. Carved in stone, their robes are forever etched in soft folds of imagined dye, their hands lifted in gestures of command, of stillness, of ownership. You study one closely. Domitian, perhaps. Or maybe Trajan. The statue's base is cracked, and moss curls along the hem. You run your hand along the folds of the toga. The purple's long gone, of course, but you can feel where it would have been. The fabric becomes a phantom, the color a ghost. And yet, even in stone, you know who was in charge. It makes you think. Purple didn't need to exist in abundance. That wasn't the point. The power of the color came from its scarcity. Its specificity. The way it let Rome enforce order not through walls or swords, but through fashion. You walk through the fading light now, toward your own resting place, still thinking of those men, those robes, those stripes that ruled the Senate floor without ever raising a voice. Because that's the thing about purple in Rome. It didn't just signal power. It was power. Stitched into a fold, worn like a shield, and always noticed. The sun has dipped fully below the rooftops now, casting Rome in a hush of dusky pink and soft gold. The air cools as shadows stretch long between the columns, and the marble steps of the curia still hold the warmth of the day. You sit on one for a moment, listening. The Senate is quiet. Its echoes stilled for the night. But the ghosts of debate still cling to the walls. Statements whispered in confidence. Insults veiled in rhetoric. Alliances sealed with the subtlest nod of a purple hem. Tonight, The color rests draped on benches and shoulders. But for senators, it never truly sleeps. You rise again, curiosity tugging you back through the city. Past statues of forgotten heroes. Past fountains where wine once flowed in celebration, and where laundry water now swirls with ordinary suds. Past children tossing pebbles and grown men muttering about the price of olive oil. And then, past a small domus, its outer walls painted with fading murals, its upper windows open to the cooling breeze. A lamp flickers behind a curtain. Inside, you glimpse a senator at his desk. He's alone, in half light, with scrolls spread before him and a thin cup of watered wine untouched at his side. His toga hangs across a low couch, carefully folded. The wide purple stripe, his badge of office, seems to glow even without light. He's not reading. Not yet. He's staring. You lean quietly against the outer wall, out of sight, just listening. He sighs once, then slowly begins to write. A speech, perhaps, or an argument to deliver in the morning. But you can feel it, the weight he carries, not of his words, but of what he wears. Because in the Senate, purple was more than decoration. It was expectation, obligation. The fabric turned every opinion into a performance. He had to speak with just enough confidence to honor his rank, but not so much that others accused him of arrogance. He had to stand just right, sit just right, wear the color as if it was effortless, but also as if he'd earned it. You remember stories told earlier in the day, tales of senators who had the width of their clavis, the purple stripe, measured, whispered judgments made about whether it looked too bright or too thick. One senator had a second stripe added, thinking no one would notice. They noticed. Historians still debate whether such detail obsession could have truly shaped policy. But Rome was a city of image, of gesture. And in that room, every robe was a chess move. Even fabric could speak before the mouth opened. You imagine it now, the Senate chamber at full roar. Dozens of men in white, but not really white. Their togas are coated, those stripes slicing through the folds like declarations. You can tell who just arrived from the provinces. Their robes still stiff. The dye fresh. Maybe a little too fresh. Glinting. Almost theatrical. They'll be corrected, gently or otherwise. You spot the old guard. Seasoned. Slightly slouched in their seats. Their purple dulled with years. They don't care anymore if it shines. It already earned its place. And then, always, the emperor's man. Not the emperor himself. He rarely visits. But his shadow does. In the form of someone whose stripe is not just purple, but purple plus. Richer. Embroidered. His movements draw the eye. And when he stands, everyone listens, even if he says nothing. You walk through this imagined chamber like a ghost, weaving between chairs and senators, hearing the rustle of stiff togas and the hiss of careful words. The speeches begin, some passionate, others rehearsed, all draped in fabric that costs more than most homes. One senator makes a cutting remark, clever, pointed, calculated. He adjusts his stripe as he says it. The gesture is subtle, but it lands. Another replies. His stripe is narrower. He doesn't touch it, just glances toward the brighter robe across from him. And that's the argument done. You step back into the quiet street, leaving your daydream Senate behind. In the real world, purple threads have dictated alliances, toppled careers, crowned favorites, and marked targets. You recall the story of a general, beloved by his men, triumphant in the East, who returned to Rome wearing a triumphal cloak stitched with unauthorized purple. It wasn't a robe of ambition, he claimed, just one of gratitude. 2 weeks later, he was exiled, not for failure, for fabric. And in the Senate today, they still talk about him. They don't mention his name, just refer to him as the cloak. That's how strong the color's hold is. Even in memory, it outlasts the man. You continue down the street. A gentle breeze tugs at your sleeve. You glance upward at the stars starting to blink awake. Somewhere, above this city of stone and echo, is a sky that doesn't care what you wear. But down here, even the stars might hesitate to outshine a man wearing purple. You pass through a narrow gate now, into a quieter district. Fewer torches, fewer polished sandals. Here, the buildings lean in a little more, close together like conspirators. The windows are shuttered. The walls are warm with the day's heat, and the street smells of rosemary, cooling oil, and the sweet, sour tinge of spilled wine. It's the kind of neighborhood where people know things before they're told. You move quietly past a corner where 2 men speak low over a crate of amphory, and you catch the edge of the sentence, "He wore the sash again." That's all. No name. No need. Because when someone wears purple they shouldn't, people don't forget. You stop at a taberna, where lamps flicker inside and laughter rolls out like wine from a cracked jar. You lean in, unnoticed, as a group of traders tell stories. So there he was, one says, swaggering into the banquet like some little Caesar, with this belt, purple, real Tyrian stuff, not the fake plant, dye kind, just tied around his waist like a curtain cord. Groans and chuckles ripple around the table. What happened? Someone asks, mouth full. The storyteller leans in. Nothing. Not right away. He smiled, drank, even made a toast. People clapped. He sips his wine, draws it out. 2 days later, someone delivered him a folded robe. Plain white. No note. Just a robe. The room goes quiet. You feel the message as much as you hear it. Purple, you realize, doesn't always get you killed. Sometimes, it just gets you. Erased. Sent back to white. Made invisible again. They move on to other stories. About imports from the East. About temple taxes. About some fool who tried to pass off beetroot dye as Phoenician. But that earlier tale lingers like smoke. Historians still argue whether these little acts of fashion defiance were intentional or ignorant. Did men like the sash wear or know what they were doing? Were they signaling loyalty, ambition, rebellion? Or were they just, perhaps, caught up in the glow of the color and forgot, for a moment, what it meant? You exit the taberna and head back uphill. Past the lower markets. Past a shrine to Mercury, his statue holding a winged cap and a crooked grin, as if he's seen every shade of ambition in every shade of cloth. You remember the stories of pretenders, men who saw purple not as warning, but as invitation. One general, Clodius Albinus, long after the Republic had crumbled, famously donned the imperial purple while stationed in Gaul. He had the support of legions, coins minted in his name, and a voice that made crowds cheer. He also had a rival, Septimius Severus, who responded by having Albinus hunted down and killed, then executed everyone remotely associated with his wardrobe decisions. That was the price. A purple cloak, a bid for power, and an unceremonious death in a borrowed room. You turn a corner and enter a quieter street lined with rental houses. Simple stone apartments where the light seeps from behind worn curtains. Somewhere behind one, a girl hums a lullaby. Somewhere else, an old man mutters to a dog. And you recall another story. This one smaller, but heavier in its own way. A tailor's apprentice who wore a piece of discarded purple fabric as a headband, just to keep the sweat out of his eyes. Someone important walked by, saw it, said nothing. But the next day, the tailor's stall was closed. The apprentice was never seen again. Was it punishment? A warning? A misunderstanding? No one knows. But the other tailors started using plain white cloth after that. You reach the top of the street and stop beside a public fountain. Cool water trickles from a lion's mouth into a basin slick with moss. A child giggles as she leans over the edge. Her mother tugs her back gently, wiping her hands on a tunic the color of sand. There's no purple here. Not because they can't find it. Because they won't. The fear lingers, even in those who've never owned a toga, never met a senator, never seen a snail that wasn't crawling across a garden tile. Because in Rome, you don't need to wear purple to know what it means. You sit by the fountain, listening to the splash, to distant bells, to the faint clink of a cart wheel striking a cobble. The city breathes on, unaware, or maybe too aware, of how tightly color wraps around its heart. Purple is beautiful, but it is also dangerous. A silk knife, a woven warning, a question asked aloud. Every time it's worn, who do you think you are? And even when no one answers, everyone hears it. You rise from the fountain, your legs stiff, your thoughts slow. The quiet has deepened now. Rome's deep exhale between twilight and true night. Windows flicker. Gates creak shut. And above it all, the rooftops seem to lean inward like old senators sharing secrets. You wander toward the Palatine Hill, where the wealth is thick and the air smells less like street dust and more like rosewater and old money. This is where the emperors live, or at least, where they've lived. In palaces that sprawl like lazy lions across the stone. And here, purple isn't feared. It's worshipped. You step through a colonnaded courtyard, empty but echoing, and imagine it filled. Courtiers in silk, slaves in silence, musicians plucking harps beside marble fountains. At the center of it all, the emperor. And he is draped. Not just a stripe, not an edging, a full cloak, toga picta, dyed deep Tyrian purple and threaded with gold, gleaming like sunset on a storm cloud. He walks slowly, because why hurry when the entire empire is watching your hem? This wasn't always the case. Early emperors, like Augustus, claimed to be first among equals. But as power consolidated, so did symbolism. Purple transformed from an honor into an aura. It wasn't just imperial anymore. It was divine. Historians still debate when the color crossed from political into sacred. Some trace it to Nero, who loved dressing like a sun god. Others to Diocletian, who reorganized the empire and turned imperial power into ceremony. But many point to Constantine, who fused Roman grandeur with Christian rule and sealed purple as both emperor's garb and God's shadow. You hear tales of emperors so obsessed with the color, they ordered entire rooms painted in it. One supposedly refused to touch any cloth that hadn't been dyed inside in itself. Another demanded purple, sold sandals, even though no one ever saw his feet. And then there's Elagabalus, The emperor who wore only purple, who slept on purple sheets, ate off purple plates, bathed in purple wine. They say even his horses wore violet, stitched harnesses. Was it extravagance, insecurity, or just someone so drunk on power he forgot where the die ended and he began? You chuckle softly, then immediately glance around, laughing at an emperor, even one dead for centuries, feels risky in this place. You turn a corner and find yourself at a set of bronze doors, closed for the night. They bear the imperial seal, worn smooth by time, but still proud. Above them, a mosaic shimmers faintly under the moonlight. It shows a man in flowing robes, purple, of course, seated on a throne. Around him, senators kneel. Soldiers salute. A child offers grapes. And somewhere, in the corner, a figure hides his face. Maybe a reminder that power borrowed from color can be returned or revoked. Because purple didn't just elevate, it isolated, to where it fully meant to accept that people wouldn't speak freely around you, that every word would be calculated, that your clothes were louder than your voice. You walk back down the hill now, past darkened temples and whispering olive trees. You remember hearing about a man, not a senator, not a general, just a wealthy merchant, who commissioned a full Tyrian cloak in secret. He wore it once, at a private dinner. No one else saw it. The next morning, he buried it in the garden, too afraid to burn it, too afraid to wear it again. He died 10 years later. The robe stayed buried. Maybe it's still there. You pass a priest leaving a small shrine, his robe fluttering faintly in the breeze. There's a touch of purple at his collar. Not imperial, just ceremonial. He sees you, nods once, and disappears into the night. Even here, in the realm of gods and emperors, the line holds. Purple is holy, and holiness, like politics, is dangerous. You pause beside a statue of Minerva, goddess of wisdom. Her robe, carved in stone, flows in perfect symmetry. In the moonlight, it almost looks colored. You wonder, if she stepped off her pedestal tonight, what would she wear? Would she dare purple? Or would she know better? Because the gods, for all their power, never had to wear it to prove who they were. Only humans did. The road curves east now, gently descending into a quieter quarter of the city. The Palatine shrinks behind you, its walls silhouetted against a sky heavy with stars. Rome seems to sigh again, settling into itself as torches dim in the laughter of late. Night tavern softens to murmurs. But tonight, you're not heading home. You're heading to the one place where even the boldest colors are finally laid to rest. A funeral. Not a grand imperial affair. No silver eagles or parades of masked mourners. Just a modest villa courtyard draped in white linen, lit by oil lamps, and filled with the low, rhythmic chant of family voices saying goodbye. You slip inside, unseen. In the center lies the body. An older man, a former senator, his face serene beneath a thin shroud. The shroud is plain, but beneath it, a glimpse of purple. Not much, just a sash tied at the chest, barely visible in the folds of cloth. But it's there. You glance around. No one looks surprised. Because for the Romans, purple in death was not always about power. It was about remembrance. Clothing the dead was part ritual, part message. The garments chosen spoke to legacy, virtue, station. For the wealthy, Even in death, a little purple was expected. Not flamboyant, not imperial, just enough to say, I mattered. Historians still argue whether this practice was religious or cultural. Did Romans believe the gods noticed the color? Or was it simply a way to tell the living, he wore purple in life, and we honor him still? You step closer. The sash is faded. Not bright. Not new. Perhaps it was his first. Perhaps he wore it the day he took his oath in the Senate. Perhaps he never stopped. Someone offers a bowl of incense. You take a pinch. Toss it onto the coals. The scent curls upward. Sweet. Woody. Heavy. And carries a memory with it. Of robes. Of speeches. Of whispered rivalries over whose purple shone brighter under the skylight dome. Now, that weight is gone. Folded. Burned. Or buried. You walk through the courtyard garden, where stone markers bear soft carvings of laurels and doves. One bears a faint image of a toga, its hemline shaded in mosaic glass. Once vibrant, now dulled by rain and years. It's strange. In life, purple could make you a target. In death, it wrapped around you like a shield. You hear another tale. This one told softly by a boy seated beside an older woman. He speaks of a cousin who died young, before earning any stripe of honor, but whose parents buried him in a tunic lined with violet thread to give the gods something to notice. The old woman nods, not disapproving, just tired. You sit a while on a low stone bench, watching the oil lamps flicker in their clay bowls. A breeze lifts the linen drapes, revealing more of the shrouded figure. You see now that the robe beneath the shroud is carefully mended, stitched along the sides. Its purple band repaired so many times it's more patched than original cloth. But the family chose that one. Not a new robe. Not a richer color. The one he lived in. The one he earned. There's a simplicity to it. A stillness. The kind of dignity purple rarely carried in life. Later, as the ceremony ends, someone carries the robe away to prepare it for cremation. Others won't burn it. They'll fold it carefully and place it beside the urn. A final gesture. You rise again and walk through the shadowed streets, thinking of all the robes that have passed through this city. Stripes stitched with trembling hands. Trims that sparked envy. Cloaks that became accusations. You think of emperors buried in golden togas. Of generals whose coffins were hidden in plain linen to avoid politics. Of sons wrapped in purple so their parents could imagine them still rising in status, even beyond the veil. You pass another small shrine, this one to the Laras, the household gods. Someone has left a scrap of dyed wool beside it. Faintly purple, perhaps from a ribbon, perhaps from a robe. You smile at the thought, even in the afterlife. Romans couldn't help but make fashion statements. And maybe, just maybe, the gods didn't mind. You rise early the next morning, before the city stirs. Dew clings to the rooftops. The air carries that rare Roman freshness, like the city hasn't yet remembered how loud and hot it wants to be. Today, you follow a caravan, not of merchants or senators, but of couriers bearing bolts of cloth. They move quietly, professionally, under tight watch. The lead cart creaks beneath a heavy tarp, and beneath that, purple, the real kind. Destination, Constantinople. Or rather, Byzantium, a city reborn, across the sea, where Rome's obsession with purple is about to get a dramatic second act. You pass the docks where the cloth is loaded onto ships bound for the east. The harbor bustles as ever, crates thudding, gulls screeching, oaths tossed casually into the morning breeze. But these bolts are handled differently. Carefully. Like scripture. You catch a glimpse, just a flash, of a roll of fabric the color of ink at dusk. Deep, rich, almost liquid in the light. Someone snaps the tarp closed again. Quickly. You raise an eyebrow. The guard shrugs. Imperial dye, he says. We don't look directly at it anymore. He's joking. Probably. But you know what he means. Because while Rome birthed purple's power, the Byzantines elevated it to religion. You follow the cloth, metaphorically. Now, as it crosses the sea, past the Peloponnesian coast, past Rhodes, past memory itself, and into the great eastern capital, Constantinople. There, the dye becomes destiny. In the palaces of the Byzantine emperors, purple was no longer just a symbol. It was a category of human. The phrase, born in the purple, porphyrogenitos, wasn't poetic. It was a literal statement. Emperors' children were delivered in a chamber lined entirely in purple stone, cloth, and iconography. To be born, there was to be marked for rule. To not be born there meant spending your life trying to prove you still deserved the throne. Historians still debate how much weight that title truly carried, whether it was used ceremonially or politically. But the impact is clear. Purple had fully transcended fabric. It became blood. And not just in Constantinople. In churches, bishops draped their vestments with violet thread to mirror divine authority. Manuscripts were written on dyed parchment, the ink of gold dancing across pages stained with purple. Even holy relics, when enshrined, were sometimes wrapped in cloth the color of twilight. You walk now through a basilica, empty in the morning light. A priest polishes a brass candlestick near the altar. His robe catches your eye. Not vivid, but edged in dusty lavender, like a faded echo of what once was. You approach an alcove where a tapestry hangs. It's old, fraying. Its central figure wears purple robes and a golden halo. Is it Christ? An emperor? In Byzantine art, sometimes the difference blurs. And that was the point. Byzantine emperors didn't just rule by divine right. They performed it, wrapped in purple every step of the way. Their ceremonies, layered in incense, choirs, and veils of smoke, were less about governance and more about spectacle. Purple had become a portal between heaven and earth, between symbol and self. You hear a story, perhaps apocryphal, about an emperor who refused to eat unless his napkin was dyed Tyrian. Another who outlawed inferior shades, ordering any merchant caught faking the dye to be blinded. And the dye itself, still made from snails, still boiled in massive vats. But now, even the dye houses were considered state secrets. Producing Tyrian without permission was treason. You visit one such ruin now, tucked behind high walls near a dry cistern. The vats are cracked, the shells long gone, but the stones are still faintly stained. You run your hand over them and imagine the heat, the stink, the pride, all for a color. A color that, for centuries, could make, or unmake, an empire. You sit near a fountain in the old courtyard of what was once a palace. The sun is rising now, warm on the stone. You sip water from a clay cup and think, purple isn't just powerful because it's beautiful. It's powerful because so few were allowed to wear it, and everyone else remembered who did. Even across oceans, even after Rome fell, even now, you linger in the old courtyard, letting the breeze off the Aegean ripple past your tunic, carrying the salt of a sea that once linked empires. The stones beneath your feet, cracked, weathered, softened by centuries, no longer echo the sharp stomp of imperial boots or the rustle of silk. Line togas. The purple is fading. And not just from memory, from power. You trace that thread, once so tightly woven into Rome's core, now unraveling, slowly but surely, in the soft twilight of empire. Because purple, once sacred and scarce, is beginning to lose its hold. It doesn't happen all at once. It never does. But history has a rhythm, and this one begins with chemistry. A man in a robe not worth a senator's sneeze discovers how to make dye from coal tar. Synthetic. Reliable. Smell. Free. Cheap. The 19th century hums with new purples. Mauve. Aniline violet. Perkins purple. Mass. Produced. Worn by clerks, debutantes, and shopkeepers. No snails required. Historians still argue whether this shift was liberation or dilution, whether the fall of purple's exclusivity was a triumph of democracy or just another casualty of industry. But what's certain is this: for the first time in millennia, purple was no longer feared. It was fashionable. You walk through a modern street now, centuries from Rome, somewhere quiet but familiar. A woman passes in a violet scarf, scrolling through something on a rectangle of light. A man sips coffee, his tie a gentle lilac. Children bounce by in sneakers that sparkle with glittery grape tones. No one arrests them. No one whispers. No one bows. Purple has gone from privilege to preference, from guarded to grab bag. And while the color still means things, royalty, spirituality, quirkiness, it no longer enforces anything. You smile, watching a street artist paint a mural. She dips her brush into a jar and swirls a color so rich, so deep, it could have once bought her a house, or cost her her head. Now, it's just a shade on a wall. Beautiful, bold, freely chosen. And yet, you notice something else. A pattern. Purple still attracts. In branding. In ceremony. In pageantry. British royalty uses it for coronations. Bishops wear violet in Lent. Graduation robes at elite universities often include purple trim. The color may no longer be enforced by law, but it's never really been casual. You enter a small shop selling fabric by the yard. Bolts of every hue line the walls. Saffron, azure, forest green. But the shopkeeper smiles knowingly when you stop before the deep purples. Old color, he says, tapping the cloth. Always the last to fade. You ask him why people still buy it. He shrugs. Makes them feel important. Or mysterious. Or both. You carry the cloth to the counter. It's soft. Warm. Affordable. But the feeling in your hands is ancient. Somewhere in its fibers is the ghost of a snail. A whisper of a law. The shadow of a sword. You walk through the city with the fabric under your arm. No one stops you. No one asks if you have permission. But you remember, don't you? The villas. The snatched sashes. The senators glancing sideways. The merchant who buried his cloak. The priest who tucked purple into funeral robes like folded memory. The dye is cheap now. The meaning, still strangely heavy. You sit in a cafe, order something sweet, rest the fabric on the table beside your plate. A woman nearby compliments it. "That's a gorgeous shade," she says. You smile. "Thank you. It used to be illegal." She blinks, then laughs. Thinks you're joking. You don't correct her. Because that's what history does. It fades until it becomes funny. Until a law that once cost lives is just trivia on a placemat. But under that laughter, something lingers. A memory stitched in thread. Of when purple ruled not because it was beautiful, but because it could not be questioned. You run your hand along the cloth again. Still beautiful. Still dangerous. If you squint the right way. You're walking again. City to city now. Century to century. Carrying that piece of purple cloth under your arm like it still holds gravity. The world hums around you in new languages. With new rules. And yet every so often, that same old thread glints from the edges of a curtain. A sash. A school crest. Or a ceremonial robe. The color's weight may have shifted, but it hasn't vanished. You find yourself outside a university now. Its stone walls ivy. Covered. Its towers reaching skyward like they're still competing with the gods. A procession is underway. Graduates in robes. Tassels swaying. Families gathered like Roman crowds minus the togas and questionable oysters. You spot it right away, the purple trim. It runs down a few robes here and there. Not everyone wears it. Just the PhDs. The deans. The administrators. Those who've passed through certain gates. Those who've been recognized. And there it is again. Recognition through color. You lean against a tree and watch as a professor adjusts his sash. It drapes across his shoulder. Deep violet. Edged in gold. Students file past him. Some nod with reverence. Some don't notice. But the cloth speaks anyway. Historians still debate why purple lingered in academia. Was it simply visual prestige? A subconscious link to ancient Rome? Or was it something quieter? An inheritance of meaning, passed from senator to scholar, from empire to institution. Whatever the reason, it stuck. You walk further now, down a high street filled with shop windows. One display features a mannequin in a long purple dress, glossy and daring. Another window shows a man's suit, lapels tinged with a shade they've chosen to call Midnight Aubergine. The names may change, but the effect doesn't. You enter a bookstore. In the corner, a little table displays biographies of queens and tsars, emperors and ecclesiastics. Every cover is saturated in purple, robes, banners, thrones. You flip open one book and find a portrait of Queen Elizabeth I. Her gown, layers of lavender and plum, stitched with pearls and pride. Across the page is a quote, "I am married to England." And apparently to purple. It's not just royalty, either. You turn another corner and find a shelf filled with fantasy novels. Every other wizard seems to favor a violet cloak. Mages, sorcerers, empresses of long, lost planets. Even in fiction, purple means power. You think of all the stories you've heard. Roman senators smoothing their togas before a speech. Tailors hiding dye beneath floorboards. Emperors wrapping their horses in violet reins. And now it's children's backpacks, luxury SUVs, digital brand logos, the ribbon on a chocolate box. Yet somehow, it's all still connected. Because purple, despite its long journey, still says the same thing. Pay attention. It doesn't beg. It doesn't shout. It simply expects to be seen. You pause outside a theater. where velvet ropes guide a line of guests into a premiere. One woman wears a dress that glows like plum wine. Another wears a tie so dark it's almost black, until the light hits and reveals its regal hue. You smile, not because they're channeling ancient Rome, but because maybe, somewhere deep in our collective memory, we all still remember the rules, even if we laugh at them now. You sit on a bench beneath a street lamp, unrolling your cloth again, letting it breathe in the open air. It's soft, rich, humble, but proud. You think of how far it's traveled. From Phoenician vats to Caesar's cloak. From snails to senators. From imperial palaces to supermarket branding. And yet, still it holds. Not with the bite of law or the edge of punishment, but with quiet memory. A whisper in the weave. The bench creaks as someone sits beside you. They glance down at your cloth. Nice color, they say. You nod. It used to be the most feared color in Rome. They laugh. Guess fashion really is political. You smile. Because once, that would have been a warning. Now, it's just the punchline. The evening folds gently into night, and the city's lights come on one by one. Modern torches guiding quiet walkers, late diners, and wayward thinkers like yourself. You rise from the bench, purple cloth still in hand, and begin your final walk. Not through history this time, but through memory. Not far from the river, you find yourself drawn toward a little museum. Not a grand marble hall, just a quiet building tucked beside an old church. Its outer wall is plain, its entrance modest. But inside, the past lingers in dusted glass and linen labels. You drift through exhibits of Roman artifacts. Broken amphorae, clay lamps, tools that once dug soil, or pierced armor, or stirred mash in tavern kitchens. And then, you see it. A fragment. Small, brittle, and barely holding together beneath its protective glass. But unmistakable. Purple cloth. Faded to dusk. Frayed at the edges. But still, purple. The note says it was part of a senator's toga, buried in a coastal grave, recovered centuries later during construction work. Only a scrap remains. You lean in close. The color is subdued now, humbled by time and soil. But the weight of it, still there, still heavy in your chest, somehow. Not because of what it is, but because of what it meant. This little piece of fabric was once enough to command a room, or clear one, enough to invite envy, or punishment, or all. It was once a signal, a warning, a secret whispered in stitches. And now, it's just quiet. You step back and exhale. A long breath, like closing a book whose story still echoes past the final page. Historians may argue the exact meaning of purple, when it turned sacred. Who wore it first? What laws enforced it most brutally? But you've walked the story now. From the snails of Tyre to the palaces of Constantinople. From the Senate floor to modern fabric shops. You've seen it all, the fear, the pride, the extravagance, the downfall, the stitched arrogance, the hidden scraps, the absurd, sacred beauty of it all. And now, finally, the thread brings you here, to an old dye merchant's ruin. Just a few crumbled walls, half buried by grass and time, perched on a windy bluff overlooking the sea. The air smells faintly of salt and stone, but if you stand still long enough, if you close your eyes and breathe deep, there's still a note of something else. Sharp. Briny. Rotten. A ghost of mollusk vats long gone. And beneath it, fainter still, is the scent of history. You crouch and touch the crumbled wall. Tiny shell fragments remain in the earth, crushed to dust, absorbed into time. The sea crashes below, endlessly unaware. But you remember. The robe. The stripe. The speech that trembled because it trembled too brightly. The tailor's apprentice, punished for dreaming. The emperor, sleeved in myth. The woman with the violet scarf, laughing in a world that no longer bows. It all wins together. A single, shimmering thread through centuries of hands. And in your own hand now, still that scrap of cloth. You fold it carefully. Tuck it into your coat pocket. Not because you need to wear it, but because, maybe, it's worth carrying. So now, as we ease away from purple halls and the silent ruins of imperial dye vats, let the thread of memory soften. Let the lines blur. Let the fabric loosen. You've walked far tonight. From marble steps to snail shells. From whispered laws to lavish banquets. From fear to fashion. And now it's time to lay it all down. Let your breath slow, deepening gently with each quiet second. Let your shoulders fall. You don't need to carry rank anymore. No stripe to adjust. No hem to guard. Just the quiet comfort of a story well told and the softness of twilight settling over your thoughts. The robe fades in your mind's eye now, its colors growing dimmer, the gold thread slipping back into shadow. The noise of Rome ebbs like a tide, and the city sighs one last time before sleep takes hold. Even the snails are still. Let the waves below the dye merchant's bluff become your lullaby. Let the hush of cloth brushing over sandals, the rustle of palm leaves in a Senate courtyard, the low hum of ancient gossip, all fade gently into silence. You are safe. The color can rest now. And so can you.